Columbine happened 20 plus years ago. Redditors that were in high school at the time. What was the ensuing week like? I was in middle school. Some kid wrote in the bathroom, "On Friday it will be worse here than it was in Colorado." We showed it to a teacher, and she turned to us and said, "Do you think we should tell him he spelled Colorado wrong?" Same. But HS. Some edgelord posted on such and such date blah blah Columbine eat your heart out, and it was like, hey, if you don't want to come to school, cool, if you do, cool. Fake bomb threats every Friday after lunch so we could go home early. Someone left campus to call it in from a payphone across the street. It got old real fast. Switching to clear or mesh backpacks was the worst part. Those things didn't hold up for more than 6 weeks. The worst part was, like any small scratch or anything would slice right off that cheap clear plastic. Same for the mesh ones. They were terrible. I was a senior in high school in the Denver area. The next week was quiet and somber and everyone was jumpy. I went to a school in a rough part of town. We made jokes about how it could never happen at Central. We'd just shoot back. I was one of the goth kids. Our little group all stopped wearing trench coats and toned it down a little, out of respect for the other kids. I'm glad I have 20 years of distance between myself and high school. I still get an ache in the pit of my stomach when this day rolls around, though. As a third generationer or a kid, I kinda laughed a little about the "we'd just shoot back" part, lol. I went to Eagler Crest that year, and I feel you when you talk about the ache in your stomach on this anniversary. Everybody was just sad. There was no one saying everything will be different from now on. It was just depressing that this awful thing happened at a school not unlike your own. I don't really remember any real policy changes happening until the following year. Was a trenchcoat kid. Didn't hear about it till I got to school the next day. Got strip searched. People were freaked out and wanted something to blame. All my friends' parents freaked out and wanted them to stay away from me. That's weird. You'd think you'd want to befriend the potential shooter so they didn't kill you. My best friend and I both wore trench coats and listened to heavy metal. School administrators asked us to stop, and we spent the rest of high school with everyone giving us awkward looks waiting for us to shoot up the school. They also took the school keys away from the couple of kids who had them, which was a real pain in the butt. I was on stage crew and it was fairly normal for us to be on campus after hours or even on weekends working on the plays. I was a senior and taking a bunch of shop classes to just tread water as I was done. I wore mostly black crap and was into metal, but was just waiting to go to the army basically and was never a problem with anyone. I had one class, Digital Electronics 3, where we had to make circuit boards and program it to make randomized bird noises. They gave us generic black cases and these little red buttons from Radio Shack. Anyhow, day before Columbine my friends and I decided to make them look like bomb switches. So instead of drilling holes for the speaker to this contraption, we drilled push for explosion or whatever. Our teacher was fun, knew we were harmless and laughed. So Columbine happens, and me and my nerd friends are sitting at the lunch table putting these things together before class, because assignment was due, and this is crap we did all year, and cops, administration. We were told to put the devices down and back away from the table. People came and inspected everything. Lunchroom cleared. Our parents were contacted. And nobody listened to anything we said. We were assigned this crap. Given this crap by the school. All confiscated. Things got weird after that. And my mother actually got me a pack of white shirts. I switched my black ones out for them and didn't bring my electronics out of the classroom. Didn't have any more problems. Nothing I remember specifically that week, but it sucked to have campuses shut down. Prior to Columbine, people could come onto campus freely. For example, I came back to my high school to visit after moving to a different city. I hung out with friends and went to class with them. Wasn't a big deal. After Columbine you had to sign in at the front office, declare why you were there, etc. People just started thinking about safety a little more. Honestly though, I wasn't really afraid of it happening at my school, though it run through scenarios in my head, just in case. It was more seen as a tragedy rather than a trend. I want to say Columbine also started or helped move along the school ID badge. I was a freshman the following year and that's when my HS started requiring you to have your photo ID badge on at all times or you were given detention. When Columbine happened, there was a lot of talking about what made it happen. military school, poor mental health, etc. Being Canadian, it was more of a news story to learn from than something to fear, until within a few weeks there was news of attempted copycat incidents. That's when it stopped being talked about as something that happened and can't happen anywhere else. Unfortunately in Alberta it became something to fear after the Tabor school shooting on the 28th of April, 1999. I was in middle school and we started having lockdown procedures as a result. Get down on the floor away from doors and windows and be quiet while teachers roam the halls jiggling doorknobs and checking bathrooms. Was a scary time that I still vividly remember. Everyone in our high school generally started being nicer to the kids that were considered outcasts. When it happened and hit the news, our school went into full lockdown. We had TVS in all the rooms and hallways and it was being broadcast live. Teachers and officials were worried that there was a network of people in this trenchcoat mafia and were about to execute simultaneous attacks in other schools. After it ended, and the shock of the event started to subside, I noticed popular students were a bit more social with the more unpopular ones. Even just to hi to acknowledge their existence. It didn't last forever, but it was nice for a while. At my school it was no different than usual. People talked about it of course, but not unlike we'd talk about any other newsworthy event. Back then school shootings weren't as common, or at least, not as much in the public conscience. So there wasn't any kind of extra security or even an assembly to talk about it or anything. I'd imagine some of the more outcast type of kids might have had a different experience though. I can't recall if we had any of the trenchcoat wearing types. Same here. Since it wasn't common it was kind of like, wow, that sucks and that's insane that that happened. But it was seen as more of a one-off type of event. It was rumored some dumbass student threatened to bring a gun to school while in homeroom the next morning. Otherwise life continued. Campus wasn't locked down. Fears weren't heightened in the kids. We were half the country away from Columbine. There had been a school shooting or two that had made nationwide news at that point, but it wasn't an epidemic. During spring semester of the year before, kids were pulling fire alarms or calling in vague threats seemingly every other day. No one was scared. It was just an attempt to get out of class for a few hours. I watched a student casually walk over and pull the fire alarm one morning. There weren't cameras then and I don't know if she was ever caught or if administration really cared. The punishment for that type of thing was 10 days out of school suspension. All it meant was you automatically flunked the semester on attendance rules, and you could come back to school without any issues. During that time in 1999, we were reading Hamlet. Within a week or two of Columbine, we went over the part where Ophelia has Columbine flowers. The internet are giving it symbolism as unfaithfulness in a relationship. I'm pretty the notes in our version referred to it more bluntly as something like flower of sorrow. That stayed with me more anything else about Hamlet. It was rumored some dumbass student threatened to bring a gun to school while in homeroom the next morning. The Columbine massacre inspired countless copycat shootings. The sensationalistic media coverage sent a clear message to the troubled youth of America. Kill your classmates and you can be famous. The day of, everyone was scared and quiet. The day after, they had an assembly to talk about it. The principal opened up the assembly by saying it's a tragedy that so many young people lost their lives to such senseless violence. It's an even bigger tragedy that those kids won't be here to help pay for my retirement. This was met by silence. The day after that I had an assembly so the principal could apologize. I was in 10th grade. I vaguely remember conversations about it in English class the next day, and rumors flying about anyone who wore excessive black or Marilyn Manson t-shirts. That was about it. Maybe it wasn't overly concerning because it happened so far from us combined with that mentality of invincibility teenagers often have. Something like that won't happen here. I remember Sandy Hook feeling like I was punched in the gut for 2 weeks after though. I was a teacher and a parent at that point. I was 15 and living in Dallas when Columbine happened, but what alarmed me most wasn't anything that happened around school. The worst thing was talk about a backpack ban that never came to fruition. What really worried me was hearing news reporters talking about how the shooters played Doom and listened to Marilyn Manson because I knew they were going to scapegoat the crap out of mass media and use the shooting as an excuse to try to impose. Suppose. It wasn't the following week. It was the start of the next school year for me. I was an incoming freshman in September 1999. I remember about a month in they started rounding up the weirdos, calling them to the office for talks. I was called in. I remember sitting between a gothic kid and a heavy metal kid. They both asked why I was there. I didn't know. When my interview got started it was so you get bullied a lot. I was surprised and said no cause I really wasn't. He was like, come on, you wear a Sailor Moon backpack and have red sneakers. I tried explaining I had a large friend group and wasn't an outcast or unpopular. Didn't matter. I had 2 older sisters that never would have tolerated me being picked on. Didn't matter. He was convinced I was terribly bullied and rageful over it and nothing was gonna change his mind. I changed tactics, pointing out if he'd talk to anyone who actually knew me he'd know how against killing harming others I was. It was deeply bizarre. It was like he was trying to talk me into wanting to kill people. I never looked at adults the same way after that. To this day I'm a bit scarred about the fact that a group of adults in authority looked at me and saw color. I'm not bullied. Of course you are. Look at what you're wearing. Pretty ironic. The counselor being the bully. There were some speeches and assemblies about bullying violence and we started doing active shooter drills after that. The kids who picked on me left me alone for a few weeks, which was kinda nice. Out of all the stories in this thread, I'm glad that one school actually did something good about the situation. There was a definite shift in the attitude towards the antisocial kid who all of a sudden became that kid most likely to shoot up the school. There was a lot of weird overreaction to trench coats, and the idea that this was all part of some sort of subculture. Trench coat mafia got thrown around a lot as some sort of thing to keep an eye out for. I even recall some blowback on the release and marketing of The Matrix, which featured promotional materials showing Neo and other characters in a black trench coats holding guns. Basically, everyone became hypersensitive to the signs that a kid was a possible school shooter, which honestly just served to further ostracize kids who were already the unpopular outcast type. In retrospect, it was similar to the hypersensitivity to Arabs and Muslims after 9/11. I was in middle school at the time, but my sister was a freshman. I remember some idiot student thought he was funny and called in a bomb threat to the high school a week after Columbine happened. It was fake, of course, and he was subsequently suspended for a while. Then there was all this obtuse stuff like banning trench coats and Marilyn Manson shirts, as though those were the things that caused kids to want to kill other kids. I remember there was lots of talk in the media about blaming heavy metal, violent video games, and dark colored baggy clothes. Both in the actual news and those cheap daytime talk shows. Seemed pretty clear that nobody had any answers, so they were looking for the quick and easy budgie man to blame instead of considering that those 2 kids had real psychological problems that were exacerbated by years of bullying and social isolation. It's possible to be both a victim and perpetrator of bullying, and it's also possible to have some friends and still have a perception of being isolated, especially for a person who is clearly mentally unwell, like a mass murderer for example. Everyone remotely an outcast or who wore anything like a trench coat or just didn't look like the cookie cutter Abercrombie kids was brought into the office and interrogated. They threatened to suspend people for wearing black or long coats, though I don't think anyone actually was, and most people continued wearing whatever they wanted to. Security got a bit tighter, but was already pretty tight to begin with, so it wasn't much of a change. We had several class discussion about it, and anyone who was heard pointing out that the perpetrators being ostracized was probably a factor was again brought to the office and interrogated. That one happened to me. I'd made it clear there is absolutely no excuse for going on a shooting rampage, but wondered if a school culture of turning a blind eye toward bullying and a lack of mental health resources was a part of the context. Repeating this to the administrator interrogating me, he basically said, well, if they would just be normal it wouldn't happen. Then I got a call home for rolling my eyes at him when he said that. Someone called a shooting threat into my school. It was almost certainly fake, and the principal told all the parents, listen, if you're freaked out, your kids don't have to go to school. All my friends got the day off and played video games at my friend's house, and my parents said no, this is bulls. You're going to school, sorry. Instead of addressing mental health, my school banned backpacks in response. It was ridiculous. Our school was pretty big and going to your locker between each class wasn't always possible. One girl put her books in box on a skateboard and pulled it with a rope. The next week we could use backpacks again. Our school had two options, mesh or clear backpacks. Mesh were deemed cool but easily got wet. Clear were for the nerds, although it kept your things dry. School was a weird time. I used to wear a vintage navy bridger coat that had a bunch of sentimental value. It was comfortable and warm and kind of stylish, and perfect for the climate I grew up in. When I came into school, I had no idea about the shootings, but the vice principal was waiting for me and gave me the option to give it to him for the rest of the day and not wear it again, or to keep it on and face expulsion. When he told me about the shootings, I gave it up without a fight, and he told me to pick it up at the end of the day from the main office. End of the day comes, and when I picked up my jacket I discovered that somebody had shredded it with scissors. That day, and the days that immediately followed, taught me some valuable lessons about trusting other people. Sorry to hear that. I was a junior at Columbine. The week after feels like numbness personified. The only thing I truly remember is the amount of media, the amount of intrusion into our pain, the waiting to hear the names and the realization that they were gone forever, the nightmares, the tearful reunions, the realizations that childhood was gone and life would never be the same. Feels like 1,000 years ago and yesterday all at the same time. The saddest thing though is that all the bulls that each of you had to deal with after was fruitless. It didn't stop it. It's hard to feel hopeful that anything will anymore. My friend and I were arrested for wearing gorilla masks to the basketball game 2 days after the massacre. We didn't really think there was any correlation, so didn't expect the backlash. We got 12 months probation and were expelled. On the East Coast, so geographically removed, but one of my good friends had moved from Columbine where he would have been a freshman at the time. Even though the whole thing to me was just a story on the news, he was devastated because he knew the people impacted. It was really tough seeing him watch it all unfold from across the country. I never asked him about specifics, but it was obvious that he had that dreaded mixture of relief that he was not there to be in danger and regret that he was not there to be helpful. I was a sophomore in Colorado. We had a new girl in my American history class who had just transferred from Columbine. She was crying in class. The principal came to walk her to the office where her parents were. She knew several of the kids who died. That made it feel more personal. The whole country was hit by a wave of moral panic. False rumors were spread throughout the then nascent internet. I was living in Guam, and our high school conducted active shooter drills. I remember some of my friends' parents wanted them to stop playing violent video games because they feared it would turn them into killers. I never got the whole violent games bad thing. A kid at my school plays nothing but simulation games like Planet Coaster and The Sims, and is constantly ready to deck someone in the face. Meanwhile, my friend plays GTA and COD constantly, and he would never hurt a fly, unless the fly was actively looking to hurt him. We got called to the office a lot more afterward for every little thing. Zero tolerance policies got started. Our group of friends was sort of outcasts but did nothing wrong but drink together on the weekends, maybe smoke some weed if someone had some harmless fun from some kids who had finally found friends, etc. But one of the friends decided to call us the Brotherhood. His best friends ever, lol. Makes a logo, nothing crazy, but starts writing it on everything. His notebooks, locker, etc. Then Columbine happened and all of us get called into the office over gang related activities. What is this Brotherhood? What do you guys do? Are you a cult? Made it worse when I wouldn't tell them crap about what we do and laughed at them. No one did. This is serious stuff. Didn't you hear about Columbine? Basically the faculty lost their dang minds over it. Big issues around students wearing Marilyn Manson t-shirts. I was on student council and I remember our admin wanting us to ban the shirts. Seniors used to play assassins with super soakers and that was banned, with the threat of detention or suspension. Classes did it anyway, but it was never near the school. I went to college with a girl who survived Columbine. She didn't talk about it, but I don't blame her as it was still fresh in her mind and it was like people labeled her a certain way because of the experience. I was in 9th grade and our geography teacher made us write our names at the top of a sheet of paper, and then each person's page would circulate around the classroom with everybody writing something nice about them on it, and passing it down. So eventually you got your paper back with 30 different things people liked about you. It seemed so corny and lame at the time, but I'll never forget some of the wonderful things that ended up on my page. Hey, we did a similar thing in 9th grade and I also remember the nice things people said about me. Smart teachers. We didn't hear about the extent of the shooting until I was at home. Couple things stand out. 1. News stations were obsessed with tracing the shooter's steps through the school. X started in the cafeteria where they killed 3 students, then walked to the library and executed 7 more with assault rifles. They were also constantly showing helicopter video of the students running away from the school though a field while they were getting shot at. Pretty explicit and fricked up. 2. People were much more conscious of threats and took them more seriously. Before, we would jokingly say things like "I'm going to kill you" and then have a laugh. Someone jokingly said that after Columbine and our group of friends got serious and told him that you can't say that anymore. That just always stuck out to me as something that made me realize that the world was going to be different after that day. I was the goth kid. Well, still am. In HS that ran in the social circles of the people that looked like they could do a school shooting. My locker got searched. So were the lockers of a lot of people I knew. I remember in history class my teacher asked the class if they thought it's something that could happen here. HS was in NYC so no. And people looked at my friends and me. I remember scoffing and saying something along the lines of "I don't hate you guys enough to spend that much time plotting your murders." The rest of the school week was strange, but eventually settled down. I'd argue that was probably the best response you could give. I was a junior in high school. This was one of those rare loss of innocence type moments, like 9/11, a nothing will ever be the same moment. The security camera footage was like a cursed cultural artifact. As an adolescent boy, I wasn't very emotional or scared, but I finally knew what the word chilling meant. It was the most haunting image I had ever seen. When an adult teacher could muster anything to say, which wasn't often, we were encouraged to be better to each other. I don't know that anyone was. Looking back, something was supposed to change. Like, how could this ever be allowed to happen again? I don't know if anyone would have guessed that it would get worse. Horrifically worse. This comment is really eerie. They locked all the entrance doors but one and took everyone's pocket knives away. It was very annoying. I don't think anyone was afraid of a school shooting. This was in Nebraska where half the students had a shotgun out in their truck in the parking lot. I was a freshman. I was homesick from school that day, so I was watching the news live as it was happening. I remember not fully understanding what was going on, and then it hitting me like a ton of bricks. When I went back to school, it was awful. I was one of the kids that was picked on mercilessly, and I has been in therapy for years already by then. Some kids knew, and the ones that did told the ones that didn't, so I ended up getting it from all angles. They kept asking if I was out that day because I helped them plan it, or if I had been taking notes for what I was going to do when it was my turn. I was slowly losing my grip on reality because they were so horrible. My junior year, I attempted suicide. Shortly after I went back to school, I had to go to a hospital-mandated doctor appointment. It happened to be on the 2-year anniversary, when someone had called in an anonymous threat to our school. I went to the appointment with my mom, and it all came out about how horrible everyone was. She didn't make me go back to school that day, and the next day she walked in and absolutely laid into the administration for not putting a stop to the endless bullying. Word got out that I had been hospitalized for an attempted suicide, and somehow, everyone backed off. I was still miserable, but they left me alone after that. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.